The race is on, and with Formula One teams waking up after their enforced 2-week summer slumber, what better time to tackle questions from our listeners? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to discuss the new stories to come in 2025, driver market shenanigans, and much more are Jon Noble and Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Scott, welcome back. How are you? Enjoyed your break? Refreshed?
Yeah, feeling pretty good. Had some time off, although clearly out of the swing of doing proper recordings, because this is actually our second time attempting to start this, and I've had camera issues trying to join. I've then had microphone issues that were ongoing, and we started again. And in the process of all of that, I spilled my drink all over my desk. So it's going very well.
It was very, very well timed, because when I asked you that, how are you, refreshed question, you just vanished. So I thought, well, that tells a story,
It's fine.
It?
It was a dress rehearsal, and it gave me an anecdote to then answer the second time round, because I was honestly floundering to answer that question the first time. I think that might be why I knocked everything over.
Well, as we know, everything is a content opportunity. And Jon Noble, how about you? A good break, and any technical problems for you?
No, technically all fine, actually. And yeah, decent break. Been quite a nice summer, actually, because not a lot going on in that middle week. Normally, the summer's been ruined by wild driver announcements or a bit of chaos, but
Alpine
so
doing
far.
Something stupid.
Yeah, so far, all looking good and starting to ramp up now. Things starting to roll on, and looking forward to Zandvoort.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll be heading to the Dutch Grand Prix imminently, but we've got loads of questions now from the Race Members Club, and thanks to everyone who sent them in. We'll get through as many as we can, and we should hopefully get to a few more ahead of the Dutch Grand Prix as well. And remember, we've got a very special offer, 90% off your first month subscription to the Race Members Club on Patreon. Loads of exclusive members content there, bonus podcasts, videos. There's a thriving community there as well. We're doing a lot of work on that and really enjoying it. So let's get into it, Scott. The first question comes from Padraig Riley. Cadillac driver talk seems to have drifted away from the second seat going to an American. Is it looking likely at this point they will stick with a safe Sergio Perez, Valtteri Bottas pairing, or are some stateside pilots still in the mix?
No, they're not. It's going to be Bottas and Perez, barring any super last minute complication or spanner in the works. As we record this, there's a story on the website which we ran on Thursday evening that they were closing in on the Perez Bottas combination. We'll have a video going out at some point on Friday as well. It's basically, as you two know even better than I do, given your experiences. It's as good as a done deal as it can be in F1. But things can sometimes fall apart at the very, very, very last second. But right now, it's been moving in this direction for a few weeks. There was a meeting the Tuesday, I think it was, before the Belgian Grand Prix, so before the doubleheader, before the summer break, at which I believe the direction was settled on experienced drivers, no rookie, and so on. And then that crystallised the Perez-Bottas option. So the last few weeks have all been about getting that done. So terms agreed, I think quite a while ago now, a few weeks ago, but main terms are never really the problem with F1 driver contracts. I think Bottas probably found that out himself last year, and Perez found it out to his cost as well with his Red Bull contract, which ultimately left him so vulnerable, more vulnerable than he thought. So that's been the process for the last few weeks. But yeah, very much edging towards a Perez-Bottas combination.
And that connects nicely to our next question, John, from Andrew Goddard. My question is on Cadillac as a whole. Why are they waiting so long to announce the drivers? And will this be a project Christian Horner would be interested in?
Yeah, on the first one, I wouldn't say they've waited too long, actually. I think they've done kind of due diligence. They've looked at the projects. They've been through everything. I mean, every time we walked up and down the paddock over the season, Graham Loud and the team principal, you'd see him at the FIA motorhome very often. Through the screens, you'd see him sat down. We saw him with Bottas, saw him with Paul Aaron at one point. So they were scouting drivers throughout. I think they were deciding what was the best route. Should it be rookies? Should it be experienced drivers? Would they go just paid drivers? So I think they've done the right thing to take this time, because there's no rush. There's not a need to get anything. They haven't got a car to test yet. They're still building the team up. So I think they've done it right, and probably now's the right time when they need to get things rolling on a bit more. So good timing. And on the second point, it's an interesting one. I think from a competitive point of view, I'm sure Christian would love the prospect of building another project up from scratch. But one of the elements I know he is very demanding of is full control of the project. That no kind of needs to be in control of everything, needs to be master of the entire thing. So would he be a good fit for a works project with such big influence from GM and Cadillac? That's the bit I'm not sure about.
On the timing front, I think one element that we've covered in the story that we've done already is that this could be resolved as early as next week before the season resumes at Zandvoort. And actually, while part of that is maybe something that's happening a few weeks later than we thought it might, there was a bit, not just talk of, there was an expectation of one driver maybe being signed before the summer break. But the fact that they'll have probably both of them announced at the same time, again, we've already reported this, I think that speaks to it all being done, actually, if anything, a bit quicker than we thought it would be overall. Because for a while, there was talk of doing one as soon as possible and then leaving one so that they could potentially react to changes in the driver market or anything later in the year. But I think it shows that they just want to get on with doing things properly now and integrating both race drivers into their program. So actually, in terms of finalising the whole thing, I think that's happening a bit sooner, even if kind of getting to the point of them making a decision or things crystallising and becoming official was maybe taking a few weeks more than we thought it would.
Yeah, and people have to remember that these contracts are very complicated. You can agree your top line terms, and it can take a long time just to hammer through all the little fine details and that kind of thing. These are not simple documents. It's not a handshake anymore. It's not just a single sheet of paper. These are very, very complicated. I just add on Horner. I think wherever he ends up in Formula One, and I'm sure he will at some stage, it's going to be as someone who has to have a stake in the team, if you see what I mean, rather than just as an employee. So that's just a thought on Horner. Now, we have one other question related to Cadillac from Maltese Falcon that I'll take. In 2026, do you expect Cadillac to be cut adrift from the midfield, a la Lotus, Virgin and HRT in 2010? Will the brand new rule set ultimately help or hinder them? Yeah, I do expect them to be cast adrift from the midfield, which just reflects the scale of the task of building up a team from the ground up. There's a lot of good experienced people there, but there's a huge amount to do. You don't have all of that historical work you've done, an IP, you need to generate all of that. It's a massive, massive, massive task. And this Cadillac program is going to take time. So early on, I think it's just a question of qualify. Obviously, there's the 107% rule, which is based on Q1 times. So that helps a little bit because it's not the outright fastest. But to be allowed to race, you've got to show you can deliver that pace. If you don't in qualifying, if you've done it other times in the weekend, you're okay. But I think that's the number. If I was Cadillac, I'll be looking at and think, right, we need to get under that. In 2010, it was around 5%, the best of the new teams. Lotus on average were 4.8 off, Virgin were 5.3. That's a percentage rate against the overall fastest. So the 107% calculation was a bit more generous. So that for me is the bar that Cadillac is aiming to clear, and it's not a foregone conclusion because I don't think the new rules are going to help, because if there's existing rules, you can copy a lot of ideas. If it's new rules, you are generating all of those ideas from scratch.
There is also the unknown about the engine as well. I don't think anyone's expecting a full-on 2014 repeat, but let's just assume worst-case scenario, because Ferrari was nowhere near Mercedes at the start of the V6 turbo hybrid era. If that ends up being repeated to any extent, there's what, half a second, maybe more, just in engine performance alone. If they get it completely wrong on that side, then you factor in all of the other stuff as well. So I think, we're not going to dwell too much on the driver choice, because I think if it is going to be as official as soon as it could be, we'll obviously go into it in a bit more detail. But that competitiveness point, I think, is why they're going in the direction that they want to go in with Perez and Bottas. You could argue that if it's going to be as fine as the 107% rule, as you mentioned, Ed, maybe they do need to have a super fast young driver in there just to get those extra couple of attempts that they might have over a Bottas or a Perez. But it's about everything else, because that whole level of competitiveness is such an unknown that you can't have that variable on the driver's side. But in the short term, and then in the longer term, you need that experience. You need all of those things that a Bottas-Perez combination would bring to try and accelerate the learning process as quickly as possible, because they're not going to look at it this way, obviously, because it would be foolish. But year one is basically a write-off for this team. And I think year two is going to be a glorified testing season as well. You're looking at year three before that team even becomes respectable in the midfield, I think. And if it does anything sooner than that in the first couple of years, it's not that it's not that I'll be stunned or anything like that, but I would be surprised, because I can't stress enough how big the challenge is ahead of Cadillac. And I think a lot of people in the team are aware of that as well. And some of them might not like the idea of speaking so negatively and being open about the fact they're going to be last, they're going to be off the back or whatever. But I think even if you spin that the positive way and say it's all about how much progress we can make and how fast we can make it, that still accepts that you're going to be coming from a very low base.
Yeah, I'd say if Cadillac can out-qualify people with any regularity on merits, that would have been a sensational achievement. That's equivalent of winning championships for a team in that scenario. Right, let's move on to some other topics now. Scott, a question from George. Max Verstappen is staying at Red Bull and a McLaren driver will win the title. So what's the biggest story of the second half of 2025 beyond that?
Well, I did wonder if the Cadillac driver announcement was one of those, but I think because it's been boiling down to something so obvious for a while, and it could happen quite quickly, I don't think that really covers it. So I'm torn between two, which I'll then throw to you guys to then pick which one, or if you agree with them, or if there's something else. But I think it's what happens with the Red Bull seats. Does Yuki Tsunoda save himself, or does he fall out of contention entirely? Then it's Isaac Hadjar to Red Bull, Arvid Lindblad promoted to Racing Bulls alongside Liam Lawson. I wonder if it's that, or it's what happens at Ferrari. Will Ferrari actually turn it around? Will Lewis Hamilton go on to have the record for the longest wait for a first podium for Ferrari in a Grand Prix? Will he pull it together, or will it end up being an escalation of some of the negativity that we saw really reach a crescendo before the summer break? Those feel like the two most open and biggest things, because obviously they relate to such big teams on the grid.
Yeah, they seem like the logical ones. Is there anything else that's you're expecting to see, John?
I think the Red Bull situation, but wider than just drivers, I think the whole team and the future and where it goes in the post-Horner era probably will be a really interesting point, because, Hungary was such a disappointing weekend for the team performance-wise. So I've got questions over drivers. They've got questions over where it goes from here. The fears about it being run more from Austria and becoming more kind of corporate and going down that route of kind of too many chiefs getting involved. So I think tracking how Laurent Mekies gets on, what is he allowed to do? What power does he have to make changes that are needed? Where does it fit into 26? I think that would be one of the big defining points. Whereas I think the Ferrari situation could turn on a dime, basically, that if Lewis has a weekend where he's 1/10 quicker, the world's transformed. Because I think Hungary was blown out of proportion by him just missing out on that kind of Q2 spot. Then it all snowballed from there, and the comments came out and things got very difficult. So I think Ferrari could turn very quickly. I think Red Bull's a slow burner.
Yeah, and I think it's worth remembering with Red Bull that the races before the break, that doubleheader, they were kind of in heads down survival mode. So I don't think we really saw the new Red Bull properly in that period. Right, the next question, John, from Rob Fuller. There's been so much to cover this season already, from the expected Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari to the unexpected Christian Horner out and the damp squibs, the technical directive in Spain. Have there been any stories this year that are more significant than people realise, or that have flown under the radar and just haven't been reported? Well, you'll have reported everything you know. We know that. But there's often a weighting of stories that exists in the world, isn't there? And sometimes things do slip a little bit under the radar.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to 2026. It's kind of been bubbling away in the background. You hear team comments and team concerns. But I think there are plenty of situations still that have possibilities to be complete hand grenades and become huge controversies. There's the issue of the cost of the fuel, for example. We did a story back in Miami about it being estimates of €300 a litre potentially for fuel. And this is millions and millions of pounds teams are having to find on the fuel prospect. But it hasn't become a big talking point in public yet, because this is all conversations taking place F1 commission level and behind the scenes. So I think there's issues on that. I think there's questions over kind of the engine's performance and how they're going to close the gap if there are big spreads. So I think as 26 becomes a bigger reality, I think the news urgency around it will become more immediate. Whereas I think at the moment, a lot of it's kind of been thrown forwards. But as we get into the nitty-gritty, as teams understand their cars, find the loopholes in the regulations, get exposed to reality of their competitive problems, then I think things could ramp up quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I recently did a piece talking about the driving styles for 26, and there were certain things I had to be a little bit vague on simply because there's still discussions going on that will change some of the parameters that could have an impact on that as well. So there's a few things that have got asterisk by them that could be a problem, but they're still in process. So yeah, I think there's going to be lots and lots of column inches, both literal and in the digital domain about that. Right, TJ Preston has a question that I'll take. What are your predictions for the most unlikely events that might actually happen before the end of the 2025 season? Well, tricky predicting the unpredictable. I guess the thing that there's a non-zero chance of that would be a shock would be if, say, Lewis Hamilton walked away. I don't think he will. I think it's a small chance. I think he's fairly determined. But that's the kind of unlikely thing that there's a chance that it could happen that would then cause an absolutely monumental cascade effect. Now, I do think it's unlikely at this stage, but possible. So that's the thing that sprung to mind for me. I don't know if there's any other storylines that anyone else is thinking of in the unlikely. I did think about Alpine potentially being sold, but I don't think anything happening with Alpine would be unlikely, would it, Scott?
Well,
I think anything happening.
Do you know, it's funny. I was thinking exactly the same in that, Alpine is sold, Flavio Briatore is replaced, something along those lines. But yeah, that would just be that, the wheel of nonsense that spins just seems to always have a new section added to it sort of every other month. So where do you draw the line on what would be ridiculous or unpredictable there? I mean, I guess you could, there's an ongoing driver question there still to be resolved for the rest of this year, let alone 2026. So there's all sorts of things to go with that. I mean, the Lewis one's interesting. I was trying to work out if there might be anything else driver-wise that could throw up a big twist, but really struggling to see it unless unless there was a total continuation of Kimi Antonelli's pre-Hungary form, for example. Could you get to the point where he needs to be parked or something like that because Mercedes is worried that his confidence is irreversibly on a nosedive? But they changed the car, didn't they? And he the result wasn't there in a big way. But performance-wise and confidence-wise and vibe-wise, it was, Antonelli was back to some of the brighter moments we've seen from him this year, isn't it? So I think even that is, but I guess if you're predicting the unpredictable, therefore a massive Antonelli nosedive and he gets replaced could be one of those unlikely things that happen, but unlikely for a reason.
I think with Formula One, expecting the unexpected is always a good motto to have, although identifying what that unexpected is until it happens, always very, very tricky. Let's move on to part 2 of our questions from the Race Members Club. Scott, one for you from Oscar Robledo. There are rumours on X that Carlos Sainz may return to Ferrari in 2026, replacing Hamilton. Is there any credence to these, or are they just postings looking for clicks?
I think that's sort of bait, basically. I know that the one place where Sainz was on the radar was Christian Horner's Red Bull. I believe that Sainz was part of a very, very aggressive sort of Verstappen plan B, basically, that Horner quite liked the idea of, which was, well, if Verstappen's gone, you've got a load of money and you've got no potential tension or anything like that to worry about. So you would, the idea of them paying a load of money to extract Carlos Sainz, who they could have got for free last year, or not for free, but he was a free agent. Had to pay him a salary, of course. Go after Sainz and George Russell, because obviously Verstappen, if he left Red Bull, would be going to Mercedes and blah blah blah. So I feel like Sainz was on the Red Bull radar, but there's been no suggestion at all. Certainly not that I've heard, spoken to people, senior people at Ferrari on the record and off the record, and I don't think there is any expectation other than continuing with Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. I think Sainz would actually be more welcome back at Ferrari than maybe some people think, because I know that there is this kind of division amongst the fan bases, and there is this belief that Sainz and his entourage were toxic and he's left on bad terms and all of this. But I've literally seen both Carlos and people around him in his camp walk past various people in and around Ferrari hospitality and the garage and stuff like that, and he's incredibly highly thought of within that organisation. So I think he'd be welcome back there. I think there'll probably be plenty of people who, and this is not a comment relating to Hamilton's performance, there's a lot of people there who would have been absolutely fine with Sainz continuing and wouldn't have thought it was worth replacing him because he was doing a very, very good job there. But I just don't see it happening unless your prediction for unlikely thing to happen comes true, Ed, and Lewis does walk away. Then I think Sainz would be a fairly logical person. But I think in that instance, Ferrari might just take a punt on promoting Ollie Behrman.
Yeah, well, I think it's. I mean, I'm not expecting that Hamilton thing to happen. It's just an unlikely thing that could happen. That I
No,
can
you
think
said
of.
It's definitely going to happen.
That will be the rumour all over X next week.
Yeah.
That Edd Straw says Lewis Hamilton is to announce his retirement.
Absolutely, someone will do that. I'd like to categorically say I'm not saying that, and I think he will continue next year. But yes, if you're presented with that scenario and you're Fred Vasseur, you will think Carlos Sainz could be a good solution. So that's a phone number you might reach for in that scenario, but it would obviously take some extracting. So we can't rule anything out, but Sainz at Williams next year, Hamilton at Ferrari next year, just to be clear. Right, John, a question from Luca Rocco. The fight for the Drivers' Championship between Norris and Piastri should be the talking point of the last 10 races. Would any of the two benefit from escalating the battle outside of the track, cleverly using the media to put pressure on the other? I highly doubt McLaren will be okay with this, but Lando and Oscar will soon realise the magnitude of what they can achieve.
I think the title battle so far has been quite, I wouldn't say neutral, but there hasn't been an edge to it that is going to come over the second half of the season. I think once you start getting over this phase, once you see the end of the European season on the horizon, then I think things will get more serious and things will get more intense. And then the politics will start because the fight for wins becomes a fight for the championship. And there's just some notable things like Oscar's radio message in Hungary where he said, I don't care about going after Charles for the win. I want to beat Lando. Just shows there is the first thought now that this is a championship fight. And I think, Mark Webber's been in this situation where he fought for a championship. It didn't come off in that final round, but he's well aware these opportunities don't come around very often. I think he will be telling Oscar, this could potentially be the best chance you ever have in your career. There's no guarantee McLaren have the best car in the new rule set, no guarantee Mercedes are in front. So this could be it. You cannot let any ounce of opportunity go. And part of that game is making sure your message is getting across to various people. So I don't think either driver would deliberately start kind of saying stuff in the media like we had in the days of Nelson Piquet and Nigel Mansell, that famous interviews they were doing, and Senna and Prost into the media. But it doesn't mean that they won't be putting pressure behind the scenes to try to get their own interests served best.
Yeah, it'll be things like that. It'll be things like strategy has been a big talking point the last few races before the summer break in terms of being able to deviate from the strategy of your teammate and whatnot. And there'll be a greater focus as the season goes on of McLaren letting or being more willing to risk the overall team result on a given weekend so that the drivers can fight each other fairly. Because up until now, McLaren has been very, very aware that they want to win the Constructors' Championship and they still want to prioritise the team result. So if they can get a team 1-2 or a first and a third when they were going to be first and fourth or something like that, they'll still do that, even if it leaves one of the drivers slightly vulnerable to being gazumped on strategy or anything. I think that will have to shift in the interest of that. They're so committed to letting the drivers race fairly. One thing that I was thinking and wanted to add was when I interviewed Piastri a couple of weeks before the summer break, obviously the nature of going all out for a championship, but doing so with your teammate and being aware when you're on track that you're responsible for something that thousands of people have put all this work into, was something that we talked about. And he made the interesting observation, which obviously is that, as John's right, there's no guarantee that he'll get this chance again. But he said, he believes that where McLaren is, he should be in the best place to fight for championships for many, many years. That might not be every year, but for the long term. And as much as he wants to win the title this year, he's very conscious of doing anything that stops him from being able to win or fight for more titles in the future. And I took that two ways. I think that one, that means he's not going to do anything that potentially ruffles feathers, burns bridges, is a problem behind the scenes. And I think that also means he's going to be careful. I mean, he's come close a couple of times with a couple of moves, but I think he's also very conscious of how damaging it would be if they came to blows on track as well. So I think they will fight very hard and a lot harder as the season goes on. But it's interesting, I'm sure Norris feels very similarly, but it's interesting having heard directly from Piastri that he is very aware of that of that trade-off of how much does he want to really go for the fight this year at the potential cost of, being in the best place within McLaren for years to come.
I think what we will not see is either of them just deciding they need to unilaterally take it into a media battle or something. It'll depend on what happens, and there could be a trigger of some sort. It could be something on track, or it could be something off track. And it could be that somebody feels slighted, or they could perceive that there's a slight there. There's actually nothing of the sort, because that intensity ramps up and the pressure, and that's when it becomes a bit of a tinderbox. So no matter how, I think, sensible the drivers and everyone around them is trying to be, as that intensity ramps up, and if it stays as close as it's been, then they could be interesting. But I don't think anyone will go out of their way to create an ignition point. However, there will be retaliation if they feel it is necessary, and that's when you get into that cycle of retaliation and escalation. Right, a question from PK now that I'll take. Is it odd or unreasonable for F1 to hold the first 2026 test privately? I love going to Barcelona for pre-season testing in 2017, but wouldn't ever make the trip to Bahrain on cost and distance grounds. It's therefore a shame that what could have been the most accessible and affordable opportunity to see F1 cars on track in Barcelona will not be open to the public. If they were concerned about very limited running due to new regs, they'd always be able to warn spectators that this may indeed be the case. Yeah, that first test in Barcelona, it's January the 26th to the 30th, and teams can run on 3 of those 5 days. So all 10 teams should be there, and they can choose which days they're running on. Ultimately, it's not unreasonable for them to do it, because that's F1's choice, isn't it? That they can decide what they want to do. What I do think it does is reflects a genuine lack of confidence in these new cars that I don't think matches the public statements that we're hearing from people, because it's not just the fans that aren't allowed in, it's the media who aren't allowed in. So all you will get is stuff that's either officially released or what you get from sort of back channels and that kind of thing. And stuff will get out. So it slightly concerns me that they're doing this. I understand why, but I don't think it speaks that well for what they're expecting to see, because I remember being there on the first day in 2014 at Jerez. There wasn't that much running on that day. There's just over 100 or just under 100 laps in total from memory. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember just standing in the pit lane with Gary Anderson chatting in like the first half hour or so, because there were just people in a live pit lane just hanging around, because although the track was open, it effectively wasn't. So yeah, I'd rather it was open, and I'd rather let fans go in and have their eyes open and just be told, look, you may see very, very long periods of nothing here, but they've decided to do it behind closed doors, which I understand, but I think it's a bit of a shame, and also at odds with the push to take every opportunity to get F1 out there and create what they probably call content opportunities and outreach opportunities.
I'm wary of saying this, given obviously as part of the media, we're not allowed to attend, so it might come across a little bit as just annoyed and being jilted. But I think it's pathetic, to be honest. It's also being quite. What's the best way of putting this? It's also sort of the buck's being passed in terms of where this came from, because it's becoming a bit. It's something that the teams have organised, so it's up to the teams that they want to do it. I think Ed's right. It is partly down to a lack of confidence in the regs, and nobody wants to be embarrassed. I think F1 and the FIA don't want to be embarrassed as well if there's a 2014 repeat. But I don't think that's a good enough reason to make it private like this, to be completely honest. I think it's indicative of the way F1's gone. And, it's not just F1. You see it in other sports as well. I'm a football fan. You see what the Premier League try and do, for example. But it's just part of the desire to control things and do things on their terms and with their message. And when I say them, I don't mean F1 the organisation. I mean F1 as a whole. So that does mean F1 as a corporate entity, but it also means the 10 teams or 11 next year. It means the FIA as well. They want to lock down everything, and they only want to showcase things that are good, because there does seem to be this idea from a lot of people now that there's still a few people in F1 who do understand that you do have to front up about the bad stuff. But I think there's too much of an emphasis of we only really want to talk when there's good things to talk about and show. And I just think it's rubbish, to be honest, and I don't think they should be doing it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a PR disaster when it happens, because you're not going to stop information getting out. There's not going to suddenly be nobody's going to report and try to find out what's going on. And all this will do is embellish the bad rumours and embellish the negative stories, with an inability for a lot of people to kind of check what's really going on and get a real feel for what's going on. So it's going to be a very stilted picture of the 26 regulations where the negativity will fill this huge void. There won't be any of the positives. I mean, I remember that 2014 test at Jerez. The feedback, I remember Bernie Ecclestone was criticising the cars from his office in London, saying they're not noisy enough, this is a disaster, this is terrible. But it was completely counter to what we were finding at the track itself, because it wasn't actually that bad. It wasn't the disaster he said it was. So there is a need for kind of independent people to work out what's really going on. Whereas if you lock everybody out, you're just going to fuel the bad stuff. So I think in the end, it'll be, when you come after that test, F1's going to look back at it and think, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done it this way.
And also the way that they want to, the way that they want to try and control things in general, with the, to John's point there about like it being a PR disaster and having all of that blowback, it's just totally avoidable. Like there was no, like, I mean, I'm not saying that we should have a say in this at all, but like it came, if I remember rightly, when this was announced, like it came completely out of the blue. Like nobody was really expecting it. So it felt, it just felt just bizarrely unilateral to do something like this. And I don't really think a huge amount of thought's gone into I don't think a huge amount of thought's gone into sort of the why they're doing it and what the actual consequences will be, because it feels a lot like a classic F1 thing of being secretive for the sake of being secretive. And there's a bit of paranoia around it. It's just unnecessary.
I think there's no doubt it's going to lead to a more negative interpretation of that test, because all the bad stuff will get out. And I think they'll actually, through their own just lack of confidence in their own product, they will get those new regs off to a bad start, and it will be their fault. And then we'll be doing new regs in the future, and they'll say, well, we don't want to do what we did in 2025, because they don't learn. And I do think there is genuinely within F1, for all the talk about the growth and that kind of thing, they signal with these sorts of things just that lack of confidence in so many things, particularly these regs.
The other thing I was just going to say very quickly, to come back to something I think was posed in the original question, it is such a shame as well to block fans from going to something in Europe. That's really poor, because you have these tests in, and Bahrain's a great place to do the test for the teams. They make a big effort. We're very welcome there and very well looked after there. So we've got no issue with that. But you've got 5 days of running that you're allowing the teams to choose from. Like, I might be missing something here, and I apologize if I have, but like to not even make like the last couple of days open or something like that. Like if you want to run the first 2 days or something as an informal shakedown, basically. But I think they're trying to palm it off as a private shakedown, but you can't do a 5-day event where teams run for 3 days and call it a shakedown. That's taking everyone for fools. And I think Formula One is so inaccessible to a lot of people in reality that if diehard people want to make the effort to go to a test and have the freedom to wander around the track and watch from different places, see these cars get up to speed, why deny them that? Because you're going to be able to attend the test in Bahrain, I assume. But what we're saying, that because teams are too scared that they're not going to be able to do a good enough job, which F1 should be about because it's meant to be hard, nobody in Europe's allowed to go and see the cars at the start of the year, when there's at the point where there is the most excitement in it and a new rule. So it's just, none of it makes any sense. I think it's really rubbish.
And it's also a chance, even if the cars are horribly unreliable, there's engine failures left, right and centre and that kind of thing, it's a great chance to tell a positive story, because that first test at Jerez in 2014, I would have said there's no way 10 cars are going to finish in Australia. Not a chance. And that was kind of the feeling throughout testing. But because F1 teams are so good and they troubleshoot so quickly, we had something like 14 cars still running at the end in Australia. And that was a good story. Again, missed. And yeah, I just see it as a similar mistake being made. But interesting to see if they change and signal that they're a little bit more confident in what we're going to see in 2026. Right, a question now for you, Scott, from Dave Smith. What would Franco Colapinto need to achieve to salvage his season and get another year at Alpine? And if he doesn't, who'll be in the seat besides Pierre Gasly next year?
Well, this should be a bit more straightforward, and it makes me less unexpectedly angry than the previous question. Maybe I didn't realise I felt so strongly about the previous topic, which is quite funny. For Franco, I think it's fairly simple. I think he needs to do he needs to consistently be at the level he was at in Hungary. He needs to be as fast, a bit faster than Pierre Gasly wouldn't hurt, but basically as fast as Gasly, pretty much there or thereabouts. But he needs to be there on the weekends where the car is capable of those magic moments that Gasly's produced, because when the car's at its worst and Gasly's struggling with it and all over the place on setup, ultimately just those weekends where he nips in by a tenth or two or whatever and then runs around and doesn't score points anyway, it just doesn't really matter. It's those weekends where the car's capable of more. He just needs to prove he can go with it, basically. So I think just consistently be as close to Gasly as possible on the good weekends and the bad weekends. And I think if he scores any points at all between now and the end of the year, I suspect he's safe in that seat. I don't think it's impossible for him to keep that seat, and it wouldn't be undeserved as well. There's a lot of claims and criticism of bias or dislike of Colapinto, or campaigning against him or anything like that. But much like Jack Doohan before him, I just want him to have a fair chance and do a good job with it. And it looks like he'll have that chance over the rest of the year. So it's up to him to go out and do the best job he can, even if the circumstances are difficult.
And if they don't keep him, if they need to go outside the team for a replacement for next year, who's out there with what we're expecting from Cadillac? That's two contenders off the table.
Yeah, exactly. Middle finger to whatever Flavio Briatore is up to at Alpine, isn't it? That Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas have decided to chase multi-year deals with a team that Ed thinks might not be able to qualify at certain races next year, than take any punt on a short-term deal at Alpine.
Yeah, I guess maybe if, say, a Liam Lawson gets pushed out of Red Bull, he could be a driver
Yuki
of
Tsunoda,
interest.
similar boat. So, yeah, I guess it'd be one of those. All the while Briatore is in charge, I don't see Doohan getting back in the car there. But if there's a change in team boss or anything like that, then any one of Colapinto, Doohan, or Paul Aaron, who obviously are all Alpine drivers and on the books, I think those would be the options, to be honest. I'm just struggling to see what they would be able to do and who would be an upgrade if they went from outside the current pool.
The positive for Colapinto is, unless they make a change suddenly for Zandvoort, which you can never rule out with the wheel of nonsense, as you referred to it, that exists at Alpine. Colapinto is the guy who's got incumbency, and that's always a powerful weapon. So he can stay on if he does well. And there's a lot of things against him, but he's got ability. And I don't think you can rule out that happening. That's what he's got to aim to do anyway. Right, John, a question from Alex Bentley now. Is Gabriel Bortoleto his generation's Carlos Sainz?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if this was is this like a compliment in terms of is he as good as Carlos, or is this a negative criticism that he's a Carlos Sainz? It's hard to know what the original question means, but I mean, I think Bortoleto is very, very good. I think he's one of the brightest talents they've got. There's a certain charm about him as well, very personable, obviously big following in Brazil, shown some good progress this season. The results have started coming as the car's got better. They've made these upgrades to make improve the drivability. It's allowed him to flourish. So we're seeing progress, we're seeing speed. I think he's got great potential in the future, and I think he can have a career as successful as Carlos Sainz if he's given the right equipment.
Yeah, I would interpret that question to mean he's intelligent, hardworking, probably quicker than people thought, but maybe with a little bit of a question mark of that, is he an absolute A-list driver? I think my guess is that's what the question is implying.
But if you're at a similar level and a similar kind of profile to Carlos Sainz, that means there's a very bright Grand Prix career ahead of you. I think we've seen.
I wouldn't mind being Carlos Sainz.
Would you mind being Gabriele Bortoleto?
Nope. Lovely man, fast racing driver. What's not to like?
Right, that's another podcast we'll do later. F1 driver Scott would like to be.
All of them.
Most of them.
Of course.
Not all of them.
Right, not an Alpine driver. That's the one caveat. Right, let's get on to a question now from Stevie Noises that I'll take. There's been talk for a long time about the cars having baked-in characteristics. Does 2026 represent the first real chance for the teams to get rid of them? And which team has the most to work on in that regard? Yeah, it's a good question. Those sort of baked-in characteristics, they do exist, and they come from the sum of the working practices and tools of teams. Probably to illustrate this, I did an interview with James Key before the break, the Sauber technical director, and he said, I'll just read out the quote he said. He said, with these cars, you have quite a lot of legacy in them. Some of the sensitivities on our current car are still not really where you'd like them to be. And I know from my own references that certain things are definitely too sensitive, but to dial out a sensitivity is really difficult to do when the car has grown up like that. You can do it by losing downforce, but that's going to make the car go slower. So there is this big lag in terms of if you change processes and tools and that kind of thing, which Sauber has been doing, and they've got a long way to go on this, probably the most of anyone. You do have all these legacies because you have to kind of run with them because that'll get you the best performance at a time. You could probably say Red Bull's in a similar situation, actually, in that they've got a tricky car, but you can't just tear it all up and change it for the last 6 months of a rule cycle, because you'll be much slower, because whenever you change direction or make big changes, your starting point drops and then you have to build up. So yeah, there is that kind of baked in characteristics there, and that's where it comes from. You get just assumptions and approaches and technologies and all these sorts of things because every car builds upon the previous one. So yeah, Sauber C26 is a chance for the first proper clean sheet of paper car since Audi starts to take over that team. And that's the same for everyone. So everyone will have these ideas of what they want to remove from the car, the sensitivities, as James Key put it, and what you want to achieve. And then, of course, you'll be lumbered with them probably for the next rule cycle as well. So it's a kind of constant battle. But it is true. What is the case is these, if you want to call it baked-in characteristics, DNA or whatever, they're very stubborn and quite hard to eliminate. It takes a very, very long time to work around them and push through them. So that's the battle that all teams are constantly fighting. Right, let's get into our final part of the podcast where we're tackling questions from the Race Members Club. And if you're interested in the Race Members Club, hit the link in the episode description or head to Patreon and search for The Race. Right, Scott, a question from Ben Hawkes. How impressive is McLaren's turnaround since the start of 2023?
Very. The speed of it, the extent of it, what Andrea Stella would call the good solid engineering behind it. They haven't relied on a massive, dramatic concept change in terms of anything, big visual trickery on the car, or a sudden you're not likely to get in the middle of a rule cycle anyway, but it's not like they've suddenly invented like a double diffuser type thing where you're like, damn, look, they've just thought of something nobody else has. They haven't waited for rules to change. Okay, the Red Bull fall off has been sharper and more sudden than people expected, but they haven't just relied on like every other rival going to crap basically. They've done it methodically and chipped away at it. And what I really like about it is, more than anything, is you can kind of document that in terms of the various upgrade packages across 23 and 24, and then the kind of the more underlying shift for this year, and then sort of more granular changes pretty much every single race weekend through the course of the year. So it's just fascinating to see how they've identified various weaknesses, and they've just gone about gradually improving different things. It wasn't that long ago where we were talking about the McLaren as a car that was super, super potent in high speed, because in the simplest terms, adding a load of high-speed aerodynamic performance is kind of the lowest hanging fruit in this rule cycle, as long as you've got a car that can actually then, handle it and use it. They did that in 2023. They improved other areas as well. They obviously quite clearly raised the floor of performance on that 23 car. But then through 2024, they were like, okay, well, we need to improve other areas. We need to start bringing, proper low drag parts to the car for places like Spa and Monza. They need to be able to improve on low speed corners and medium speed corners, and then they've gradually just made themselves the best car on the grid. And what's most impressive of all, I would say, is that they've taken calculated risks this year to make that car even better, and been aggressive with their development, refining every aspect of the car, and potentially upgraded the car just as much this year as they actually did in 24 and 23 when they had big transformations. But they haven't come in massive packages, so it's less obvious. It's more about, refining things every race, every other race. So yeah, but very, very impressive what they've done.
And you could even stretch that timeline back to 2018, because these things go in phases. And there was what we've talked about from 23 onwards is going from good to great. But before that, there was going from embarrassing to good, wasn't there? That was that part. So it's a really interesting story, that whole McLaren progression, and I think it's a great story for Formula One to see that teams can do that. But it does also tell you how long it can take as well. We should always bear that in mind with other teams. Right, John, a question from Mark Swain. Seemingly for the last few years, everything to do with Alpine is constant exasperation, from its botched driver contracts to its mismanaged organisational structures, its ineptitude over its engine, the list goes on. You often say when denigrating Alpine that the people there are good, so what does Alpine need to do to become credible, respectable and successful?
It is one of the most baffling soap operas of Formula One history that there's this contrast between Team Enstone that everybody knows is been a consistent force, cutting edge of Formula One. This consistent team that's won championships, has been on the rises, had the dips, had the rises, been on the dips. So it's been there forever, and yet it's got this revolving door of leadership and direction and management and names. And I think ultimately just what it's lacked is consistency. It's not gone in there, like you compare them to McLaren, for example. Zach went into McLaren and he laid down the foundations and the plan and he gave it time and they worked through and have gone to a consistent target. They didn't lay out, this is our 100 race plan to deliver X results. It was go in and sort this and this will take time.
And then I'll disagree for ages about when that 100 race counter started, yes. Which is one of the great footnotes of this whole thing.
You can't in Formula One, and I think any business, you can't lay down it's wrong to lay down a set target for a set time because there are multiple factors outside your control that influence that. But you can do the best job you possibly can and you achieve as much as you can as soon as you can, but you've got to chip away and keep going. And if you make the mistake of saying we're going to deliver X after 100 races, then say, oh, well, actually the 100 race haven't started yet. We'll wait another 16 races and we'll do this. That gets impatience in the system. You start cutting corners. You stop delivering. Disappointment sets in. Targets change and you don't make progress. You panic and change tact. And I think this is the problem that Alpine, Renault have had throughout time, is the impatience to deliver in a period that matches with the reality of what can be done and the timeframes and what's needed. And it's just been trapped in this endless circle that will probably continue for a while because it's linked to the manufacturer that's changes itself at the top. Hasn't had the consistency of a leadership within Enstone for a long time. And I think it's not a story that's going to change very quickly in Formula One.
Yeah, I feel like it needs a sale, really. I don't think Renault's been the best owner for it. And I think all of that team, since they re-established it, all that team has done is say, don't buy Renaults and don't buy Alpines in the wider world, because it's just been a bit of an embarrassment with the ever popular wheel of nonsense that Scott referred to, which did appear in a video once, didn't it, Scott?
I made one. Yeah. I was a bit worried, actually, that it would be difficult to do properly and that it would look quite silly with only 4 or 5 segments. And then I actually went through every single sort of Alpine or Renault significant change or flashpoint over the last sort of 7 or 8 years. And I filled that wheel up very, very easily.
Right, a question now from Jason Road that I'll take. With wet weather having affected Spa, has there been any further developments on the rain guards we were hearing about last year, or has that idea been thrown in the bin? Yeah, it's been thrown in the bin. They did quite a lot of work on it. They did run a couple of versions of it, and then they discovered that you just can't do it that way. The water doesn't vanish, does it? It goes somewhere, and containing it is a problem. So, yeah, the wheel guards have gone, and all credit to them for trying it and doing the research and doing the work on it. But yeah, it was just decided that this isn't working. So they pivoted away from that. And now we're talking about other things like, are there track surfaces that will mitigate spray, et cetera, which there are. But the fundamental problem with rain is it is a lot of water on the track, and that's quite difficult to magically find a way to deal with. So I think it could be one of those challenges that we're certainly never going to go away entirely. It's all going to be about, can you just mitigate it a little bit just to up the threshold for the level of wet that can be running. Right, Scott, a question from Keenan Dunn. Why has F1 not done more to celebrate its 75th anniversary? It feels like not much has been said about it other than a flashy livery reveal at the O2. MotoGP did a one-off special livery race. F1 hasn't done anything like that.
I mean, I'd love to see sort of retro livery events or that kind of thing. I just think I'm not going to speak too much on MotoGP because I confess to being ignorant to how the championship works in detail, but F1 is such a sprawling mass of various commercial entities and IP things and ego and everything that everyone's going to want control over what they do. So I think that just think they'd struggle, frankly, to pull it off. but they have been, they've been quite strong at trying to, when we see it more on site, because obviously we're actually at the races and in that privileged position to be able to see what they do. And, they've had certain special 75th anniversary branding around the place, basically at every single event, and it changes for each one. They try and do different things around sort of certain aspects. I will admit that some parts of it have seemed to me to be a bit quieter than I thought they would be. I think they were at times a bit too busy ramming the F1 movie down everybody's throats to remember that there was a 75th anniversary going on. But that was really when the excitement around the film reached its peak around Canada time. I remember someone pointing out in Canada that you had the big screen, the one that's housed just inside the hairpin. And you could see it on the broadcast. It looked like it was playing the exact same trailer for the F1 film for about 90 minutes, which just seemed horrific for all the people that had to sit in the grandstands and see it. So yeah, maybe I've missed it. Maybe it's been targeted elsewhere. But I think maybe a bit more has been done than the question makes it sound. But I would agree with the principle that it doesn't seem to have been shouted. I certainly haven't noticed it as much as maybe I thought I would, or arguably should have done.
There's other entities doing it as well. I'm going to the Silverstone Festival, which has got a fantastic display of F1 cars related to all the champions. So there are others doing stuff with it. Right, John, your final question now from Flavio Arian. There are constant comments about the rulebook only growing larger. Do you know if there are, or were in the past, serious discussions about simplifying the regulations with some core guidelines, say engine displacement and tech, a robust cost cap definition including driver salaries, or allowing teams to figure out how best to use the money? Yeah, rulebook simplification, John, is that a thing?
Yeah, it's always a topic that comes up. There's always been the desire to simplify the rulebook and make it smaller. And now it's this huge sprawling thing. There were some arguments that under a cost cap, surely you don't need technical regulations. You just have a box that the cars can go through. And then the teams can sort it out. They don't need any other money being saved because it's all under the cost cap. But I think the reality is it's a very competitive sport, and teams want clarity, and they want to know where they stand on certain things and want answers and everything defined and consistent. And the only way to provide consistency and clear definitions is to lay it down in the wording of regulations. So this is why regulations always get bigger. They never get smaller. They don't take sections away. It's always about adding more detail and adding little elements. And when problems crop up, further definitions come in. But one thing that is happening for 26 is that they've split the regulations in a different way. So previously we had sporting regulations, technical regulations, and then the financial regulations are coming off the back of it. For 26, there's 6 sections there and now. There's I can run through them if anyone's interested.
No.
Read them out from start to finish.
A, B, C, D, E, and F. There you go.
Snappy names.
There you go. So they cover everything: general regulatory provisions, sporting, technical, financial regulations for teams, financial regulations for power manufacturers, and operational. So everything's being split up just to try to make it clearer for teams where they need to look. But the regulations are only ever going to get bigger. They're never going to get smaller.
Yeah, that is very much a direction of travel. Bring back the days when it was just a weight rule, maximum weight rule at times, if you go back almost 100 years. So, I don't think we'll go back to those days. Right, the final question overall is from Chris Parrott that I'll take. What's been your standout individual race performance of 2025 so far? Yeah, there's a few contenders. Verstappen at Suzuka sprung to mind, although maybe I'd choose that as an overall weekend performance. But for race performance, I'm going to go with Nico Hülkenberg at Silverstone, who only got second in my rankings that weekend because he didn't do qualifying that well. And Gasly, I thought, overall had the stronger weekend. But in terms of the race, Hülkenberg at Silverstone, difficult conditions. He drove well. He was quick. He beat a quicker car in Hamilton's Ferrari. And crucially, what elevates it is because he started down the grid, he had to make some very, very good decisions, which he largely drove in terms of the timing of pit stops with weather conditions changing. So that's why I've gone with Hülkenberg as the standout individual race performance. But that discounts the rest of the weekend. And I always like to factor in qualifying because qualifying defines your race. It's lap 0, effectively, of your Grand Prix. Anyway, great set of questions there from everybody. Thanks very much to everyone who sent them in. Remember, if you're interested in the Race Members Club, 90% off your first month. Special offer is available right now. Click on the link in the episode description or head to Patreon and search for the race for that. And thanks also to John and Scott for their excellent words as always. Well, we're very excited about the season getting going again, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.